When God Was a Woman, the landmark exploration of the ancient worship of the great goddess and the eventual suppression of women's rights by Merlin. Introduction. Though to many of us today religion appears to be an archaic relic of the past, especially the writings of the Old Testament, which tell of times many centuries before the birth of Christ, to many of our parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents, these writings were still regarded as the sacred gospel, the divine word. In turn, their religious beliefs and subsequent behavior and social patterns have left their imprint on us in various ways. Indeed, the ancient past is not far removed as we might imagine or prefer to believe. In fact, if we are ever to fully understand how and why man gained the image of the one who accomplishes the greatest and most important deeds, while woman was relegated to the role of an ever-patient helper, and subsequently assured that this was the natural state of female-male relationships. It is to these remote periods of human history that we must travel. It is the ancient origins of human civilizations and the initial development of religious patterns we must explore. And this, as you will see, is no easy task. It is shocking to realize how little has been written about the female deities who were worshipped in the most ancient periods of human existence, and exasperating to then confront the fact that even the material there is has been almost totally ignored in popular literature and general education. Most of the information and artifacts concerning the vast female religion, which flourished for thousands of years before the advent of Judaism, Christianity, and the classical age of Greece, have been dug out of the ground only to be reburied in obscure archaeological texts, carefully shelved away in the exclusively protected stacks of university and museum libraries. Quite a few of these were accessible only with the proof of university affiliation or university degree. Many years ago, I set out upon a quest. It eventually led me halfway round the world, from San Francisco to Beirut. I wanted to know more about the ancient goddess religion. Along the way were the libraries, museums, universities, and excavation sites of the United States, Europe, and the Near East. Making my way from place to place, I compiled information from a vast variety of sources, patiently gleaning each little phrase, prayer, or fragment of a legend from a myriad of diverse information. As I gathered this material about the early female deities, I found that many ancient legends had been used as ritual dramas. These were enacted at religious ceremonies of sacred festivals, coinciding with other ritual activities. Statues, murals, inscriptions, clay tablets, and papyri that recorded events, legends, and prayers revealed the form and attitudes of the religion and the nature of the deity. Comments were often found in the literature of one country about the religion or divinities of another. Most interesting was the realization that the myths of each culture that explained their origins were not always the oldest. Newer versions often superseded and displaced previous ones, while solemnly declaring that this is as it was in the beginning of time. Professor Edward Sciarra of the University of Chicago wrote of the Babylonian myth of the creation of heaven and earth by the god Marduk, that Marduk, the new god of this rather new city, certainly had no right to appropriate to himself the glory of so great a deed. But in Hammurabi's time, Babylon was the center of the kingdom. Marduk, backed by Hammurabi's armies, could now claim to be the most important god in the land. Professor Sciarra also explained that in Assyria, where the god Ashur eventually became the supreme deity, the Assyrian priests gave the honor to Ashur simply by taking the old Babylonian tablets and recopying them, substituting the name of their own god for that of Marduk. The work was not very carefully done, and in some places the name of Marduk still creeps in. In the difficulties I encountered gathering material, I could not help thinking of the ancient writing and statuary that must have been initially destroyed. Accounts of the antagonistic attitudes of Judaism, Christianity, and Mohammedanism, Islam, toward the sacred artifacts of the religions that preceded them, revealed that this was so, especially in the case of the goddess worshipped in Canaan, Palestine. The bloody massacres, the demolition of statues and sanctuaries are recorded in the pages of the Bible, following this command by Yahweh. You must completely destroy all the places where the nations you dispossess have served their gods, on high mountains, on hills, under any spreading tree. You must tear down the altars, smash their pillars, cut down their sacred poles, set fire to the carved images of their gods, and wipe out their name from that place. Deuteronomy 12, verses 2 and 3. There can be little doubt that the continuous attacks, as recorded in the Old Testament, destroyed much precious irretrievable information. In later periods, Christians were known throughout the world for their destruction of sacred icons and literature belonging to the so-called pagan or heathen religions. Professor George Mylonas wrote that during the reign of the early Christian emperor Theodosius, the Christians, especially in the large cities of Antioch and Alexandria, became the persecutors and the pagans persecuted. Temples and idols were destroyed by fire and their devotees mistreated. As the worship of the earlier deities was suppressed and the temples destroyed, closed, or converted into Christian churches, as so often happened, statues and historic records were obliterated by the missionary fathers of Christianity as well. Though the destruction was major, it was not total. Fortunately, many objects had been overlooked, remnants that today tell their own version of the nature of those dread pagan rituals and beliefs. The enormous number of goddess figurines that have been unearthed in excavations of the Neolithic and early historic periods of the Near and Middle East suggests that it may well have been the evident female attributes of nearly all of these statues that irked the advocates of the male deity. Most pagan idols had breasts. The writers of the Judeo-Christian Bible, as we know it, seem to have purposely glossed over the sexual identity of the female deity who was held sacred by the neighbors of the Hebrews in Canaan, Babylon, and Egypt. The Old Testament does not even have a word for goddess. In the Bible, the goddess is referred to as Elohim and the masculine gender to be translated as God. But the Quran of the Mohammedans was quite clear. In it we read, Allah will not tolerate idolatry. The pagans pray to females. Since a great deal of information was gleaned from university and museum libraries, another problem I encountered was the sexual and religious bias of many of the erudite scholars of the 19th and 20th centuries. Most of the available information in both archaeology and ancient religious history was compiled and discussed by male authors. The overwhelming prevalence of male scholars and the fact that nearly all archaeologists, historians, and theologians of both sexes were raised in societies that embraced the male-oriented religions of Judaism or Christianity appeared to influence heavily what was included and expanded upon, and what was considered to be minor and hardly worth mentioning. Professor R.K. Harrison wrote of the goddess religion. One of its most prominent features was the lewd, depraved, orgiastic character of its cultic procedures. Despite the discovery of temples of the goddess in the nearly very Neolithic and historic excavation, Werner Keller writes that the female deity was worshipped primarily on hills and knolls, simply echoing the words of the Old Testament. Professor W.F. Albright, one of the leading authorities on the archaeology of Palestine, wrote of the female religion as orgiastic nature worship, sensuous nudity, and gross mythology. He continued by saying that it was replaced by Israel with its pastoral simplicity and purity of life, its lofty monotheism, and its severe code of ethics. It is difficult to understand how these words can be academically justified after reading of the massacres perpetrated by the Hebrews on the original inhabitants of Canaan as portrayed in the book of Joshua, especially chapters 9 to 11.